Tensions are flaring up once again in the Persian Gulf tonight. Iran has seized a British oil tanker that was passing through the Straits of Hormuz. This comes one day after the United States shot down an Iranian drone. The president, to his credit, has avoided starting another Middle Eastern war so far. He came close last month when Iran destroyed an American drone, but then pulled back. Every few weeks, it seems to bring another incident. How should the president react to this incident, and is there a way to achieve long-term stability in that region? We begin our show with that question. Gil Barndollar is a former Marine captain and a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. He joins us tonight. Gil, thanks very much for coming on. How close to conflict are we right now, would you say?
Well, I'd say, Tucker, if you'll forgive the pun, we're in dangerous waters. Things are clearly escalating. Yes. You know, the seizure of the British tankers is the latest step. We've got, as far as I can tell, we've got really hawks on both sides driving the process. We've got some of the most hardline people both in Iran and here in the U.S., and we're headed for a collision if we don't pull back.
So what would be the advantage to the United States, do you believe, in a conflict with Iran? What would we get out of such a war?
Oh, we don't get anything out of it. I think it's we're past the point of stupidity and verging on insanity in our policy towards Iran. The United States should be pulling back from the Persian Gulf, not reinvesting further. We've got far bigger problems at home and abroad than dealing with the Middle East problems.
So let's just boil it right down. How would you assess the threat of Iran to the United States?
The threat to the United States is negligible. I mean, this is a third-rate country. Our defense budget is bigger than Iran's entire economy. The threat to U.S. forces in the region and to oil markets and to some of our allies is a different matter. But the direct threat to Americans and to what I would term, and I think most sane people would term, vital national U.S. interests is next to nothing.
And yet there is an enormously powerful kind of bipartisan push toward conflict with Iran, cranking up the severity of the sanctions, and then people pushing for outright conflict. Why is that?
Well, you know, this is the foreign policy establishment you've had in D.C., right? These are the people that have been, you know, driving this country into a ditch for 30 years since the end of the Cold War. I mean, we've gone through, we've seen a war in Iraq and Afghanistan and a war with Iran, as much as you hear this rhetoric of limited war and limited strikes, and you get the Bret Stephens of the world saying sink the Iranian Navy as though that's just a minor thing to do. We don't control that process. You know, it's once a war starts, it escalates and goes from there, and we have no idea how that'll turn out.
And progressives are fully on board. Not all of them. We're going to speak to Tulsi Gabbard in a minute, who is an honorable exception, but many liberals are on board. Bret Stephens, you just named. There are many others. Bill Kristol. I read the other day, this show is criticized as racist for opposing a war in Iran. What's the thinking there, would you say?
Well, you tell me. How are they figuring you're racist? What's the canard being tossed around? I'm not familiar with that one.
I'm not. I wasn't either, except it was another illustration of the consensus on the left, which is that it's okay to start a war with Iran. There seems to be no real counterbalance to the neocons anymore. Why?
Well, I think the one encouraging thing, the president seems pretty clear that he doesn't want a war. He's said that, and he's taken some steps that make that seem to be a reality. You know, pulling back on the drone shoot down and not going overboard and doing something crazy when that happened. And the only encouraging news this week has been the news that Rand Paul has been appointed as essentially kind of an unofficial emissary to the Iranians, and maybe in New York right now, for all I know, talking to Zarif and some of the Iranian leadership. That's encouraging, and I think that's what we got to kind of pin our hopes on. The president has the sense not to drag us into another quagmire in the Middle East that would probably be an order of magnitude worse than anything we've done so far.
That's right, and I think it's pretty clear the president doesn't want that. He said that repeatedly, both in public and in private to a lot of different people. So I think he understands the threat there, but it's also clear that John Bolton, who still is the National Security Advisor, is agitating for a war. He wants one desperately. He said that too. Why is he still there? Do you have any idea?
I don't know why he's still there. I can't play the kind of Kremlinology of you know, White House politics these days. That's not my specialty. But I would tell you that these are the last people we should trust to prosecute a war. I mean, you've got John Bolton, the last guy in America that thinks Iraq was a good idea. You've got a Secretary of State who seems to have some real confusion about what vital U.S. national interests are. You've got a defense secretary who hasn't even been confirmed yet. You know, we haven't had a real defense secretary in 7 months. And these people, you know, they can't even execute a competent coup in a collapsing South American state. You trust them to fight a war? I think that's crazy.
They can't execute a competent coup in a collapsing South American state. And they're going to
right.
start a new war in the Middle East. I'm stealing that line. Gil, thank you very much
Sure.
for
Good
that
talking to you,
summation.
Tucker.
Good to see you tonight.